was the culture genie. The topic of today is the Sharia and what it is in Islam. First of all, let's begin with the etymological origins of the word, because I think that this will elucidate what it means. The word Sharia is derived from the root Shin, Ra, Ain, and those are consonantal letters that indicate a connection to things associated with roads or ways. For example, Shari'un is road. Thus, Sharia can be interpreted to be kind of God's intended way or the path that God wills you to tread. Sharia as a concept is thus much broader than just law, that it's usually translated as being equivalent to. In fact, law is just a part of it, and it's actually a lot broader than just that. The Sharia in its broadest form and definition could be seen as the entire religion in a way. Thus, it's important to know this when certain Muslims talk about Sharia, they are actually talking not just about law, but also about the religion in a greater sense of the word. Now we are going to go into some terms associated with the term Sharia. Now, God's intended way or God's law, and what is interpreted as being God's law, is not the same thing as God's law or way. Or at least, for most scholars, there has existed a difference between the Sharia and our interpretation of the Sharia. That is to say, the Sharia is perfect since it's from God, but our understanding of it is not. And thus you have the term Fiqh, which literally means understanding in Arabic, and is usually used to refer to understanding of the Sharia. Now, there has developed within Islam several traditions of understanding Sharia, which are called Al-Madahibu al-Fiqh, or the schools of understanding. And these traditions exist both within Sunni Islam, that has 4 or rather 5 schools of traditions of how to interpret Sharia. And there is also several others in Shia Islam, and Ibadi Islam, which is the 3rd branch of traditional Islam, has their own schools as well. These schools of thought of how to interpret Sharia differ widely from each other. And this marks the time to introduce 2 other terms that are widely used in connection to discussions about Sharia and Fiqh, which is the understanding of Sharia. First, you have the term Usul, which are principles of interpretations. These are the common ideas about what is to be used as the basis to make interpretations about God's way. These principles are different for the various schools of thought within Islam, and I will make a future video about the differences between the Madhahibu al-Fiqh, schools of understanding Sharia, with regards to their usul or principles in the future. But the various principles could be anything from aql, reason, ijma, consensus between scholars, urf, tradition, qiyas, which is analogous reason, where you compare an event that has happened in the sources with a situation that is somewhat like it. And this brings me to the sources that are used in order to discern or understand the way of God. First and primarily you have the Quran, the word of God directly. Then you have the Sunnah, which is the tradition of Muhammad or his way of acting, as Muhammad is viewed as a perfect Muslim to emulate, and it is by God's will that he should be emulated. The Sunnah is mainly found in the Hadith, which are stories about Muhammad and his closest companions, and in the Seerah, which is the biography about the life of Muhammad. The Quran is common to all Muslims, but the Hadith and Seerah can differ in its importance and in what is contained therein among various subdivisions of Muslims, both within Sunni Islam and Shia Islam. Which hadiths to use and which hadiths to not use is considered a part of fiqh, or of understanding the way of God. The result of using usul's principles in combination with the various sources that you use is Furuuu, or branches, or what is derived from these things. That's to say, the result of these things. Let's say the rules themselves and what they contain or imply. An interpretation of these things, of both Usul, principles, sources, and of Furuuu, the rules themselves, as they apply to the situation, is called a Fatwa, literally interpretation. And the one that does these sorts of interpretations is called Mufti, or interpreter. You might have heard these terms in relation to controversial subjects where some scholar or the like made a fatwa about something. I'm not here to make excuses for anything, but it's important to know that a fatwa is not necessarily a death sentence, and that fatwas and rulings and interpretations about how to act is much broader than just death, war, or terrorism. And it's now time to go into the fact that Sharia is very broad as a concept. Sharia has a maximalist approach in that there is no distinction between secular law and the religion. Sure, there are distinctions, such as ibadat, which are rulings regarding rules of worship, and mu'amalat, which are rulings and rules regarding the treatment of others. But these are more factual statements about the subject matters, rather than any distinction in the legal sense, as Sharia deals with both, as both are part of the way of God, so to speak. However, on the subject of mu'amalat, that is to say laws and rulings regarding the treatment of others, which is the part that is usually mostly comparable to a Western legal code, is actually a lot broader than what most think, and is not only restricted to strict control of sexuality with punishments of sexual transgressions, adultery and the like, or brutal punishments of crime such as cutting off the hands of thieves. Sharia in the category of mu'amalat is much more broader than that, and includes subjects such as economic law, especially trade laws, land and property laws, inheritance law, and marriage contract laws, which are still in place in many countries. And you also have taxation law, and a lot of other subjects. You have to remember that various types of interpreted Sharia or Fiqh jurisprudence was the basis for several large empires throughout history. And you don't make a functioning empire through not having more laws than just laws about sexuality. Thus, Sharia, or the Fiqh understanding of Sharia, is actually a lot broader than what most people realize when it comes to those laws that in the Christian West would be considered the domain of secular legislation. And mu'amalat also usually includes things that are not necessarily laws with penalties in this world, but just ways of how you should act generally towards other people. These can be small things such as rulings that you should not curse people, you should not speak in an uncouth manner, you shouldn't do backbiting and the like. In short, just rather normal ethical rules. This is actually the majority of rulings. The majority of rulings are not about what we in the West would see as legal matters, but about these day-to-day interactions with other humans and things related to it. These things are just as much part of Sharia as the more legal laws are, and they probably make up the majority of various interpretations and statements in most books about fiqh or understanding of Sharia. Then we have ibadat, which concerns everything that has to do with worship, and in this category we have everything that has to do with prayers and rituals and traditions and just worship generally. This category is about your direct relationship to God and doing things that are directly related to worshiping God. Sure, mu'amalat is also decreed in theory by God, but it is with regards to other humans that you follow God's commands. In this category of ibadat, it's about how you worship God directly. I think a way to clarify the difference is if we look at the 5 pillars of Islam and consider where they fall under in these two categorizations of mu'amalat and ibadat. The profession of belief, the shahada, would fall under ibadat, as it has to do with the direct worship or veneration of God, and would only fall under mu'amalat with regards to some considerations regarding apostasy and non-believers and their treatment. Then you have prayer or salat, which is under ibadat, as it has to do with worship. Then you have the obligatory alms, zakah, and that would fall under mu'amalat, as it has to do with your interaction with your community and other people. Again, it's important to know that just because it's mu'amalat does not mean that it's less a part of the religion than ibadat. Both ibadat and mu'amalat is about following God's commands. Then you have fasting, sawm, and it's part of ibadat, it's a type of worship. And then you have hajj or the pilgrimage, which has a lot of rules and rituals and traditions associated with it, and a lot of Sharia deals with how to perform it correctly, and it's part of ibadat. Though I need to mention again that the difference between mu'amalat and ibadat is not in the nature of origin. Both are religious obligations from God. It's just rather what the obligations deal with that makes the difference here. They are both parts of the path of God or of Sharia, and a believing Muslim is supposed to follow these commands, or what he or she interprets as being the correct commands. And remember, following the Sharia is the path to heaven, as laid out by God, and in deviating from it lies hell and eternal torment forever and ever for the believer. And this is why there is such an enormous amount of conflict when these ideals can clash with other ideals about law and rules of society, be it secular or other interpretations of what the Sharia really is. Because again, the Sharia is the path. If you have any questions about this very enormous subject, please put them in the comment section and give other comments as well, because I'm always open to my viewers and I like having an interaction with you. Please do subscribe, as it would help the channel spread awareness about the humanities. اشترك بالقناة من فضلكم.